welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. You have questions.
Yeah. To do with...
Even if they're not defined or definable, right? Yeah.
They're... these undefinable questions are the result of an accumulation of experiences that I don't have any context for within the normal culture of, being an adult human in 2018. I mean, these things would, I'm assuming, fall under the esoteric cultures of, I don't know.
That depends on what you're perceiving. Everything you're perceiving could be considered or deemed as concrete perception. That's relative. So we're talking about the relative perception, what the concrete is. So a dream could be considered concrete, especially a nightmare that scares the hell out of you. Or a fantasy dream where you go to heaven and it just inspires the hell out of you. Right? And you feel great because you had this dream. It's like, it really happened. So you have a sense of the concrete, even though we know what you're talking about is a mental or psychic state. That can show up as concrete. It depends. Because you have the possibility, since we are causal bodies, you can have a flash of something when you're in a dream state that you forget when you wake up, but then you see it comes to pass, and you might call it a déjà vu when it shows up in your physical world. Say, wow, I've been here before. I've seen this already. See? And so then you have the question of which world is the real world, since you had a déjà vu, right? A dream experience that exactly communicated your physical world that was coming, future world. And this happens all the time. And we can't explain it beyond that. See? And therefore it's called the causal body, the time body. And in this case, it's relative to the future. And we are in the future, but we don't have perception of it as clear as we'd like it to be, as it may be on the physical plane relative to the moment. See, this is it. This is physical. Nowness. And obviously the future is already created, because any déjà vu proves that point to you. Comment.
Yeah. Stories of gurus and masters and advanced practitioners often include things to do with what are called the higher bodies, and being operational in those higher bodies. Being able to
That's possible.
Seemingly function deliberately.
That's possible.
On those levels.
Yeah. They can't make that happen for you often. There's a lot of talk about that, but you have to be open to that happening in your own case. So you may desire it, but you may not be open to it. There may be fears blocking it. If you may be unclear about what you need to give up to experience it. And then after you experience it, what do you have to give up to pay for it? Right? And this is part of it. What are you willing to pay to be liberated? I think that's a big question for most practitioners. What are you willing to give up to be free of yourself, thought, mind, and world altogether? Empty. Just empty.
Does an increase in sensitivity to the subtle bodies and their functions, or an increase in the number of experiences that we have that are more esoteric, usually align with or indicate any form of spiritual progress?
Sometimes, but not necessarily. You have people who are already peculiar. They already have those sensitivities, but they're not on the path in a manner of speaking. They're not practicing. They're just ordinary people. In their mind, they're just ordinary people with peculiar sensitivities and perceptions, visions even, but they don't make anything of it. And so they're doing everything else everybody else does, so technically they're not exactly on the path of purification because they don't think about it. They're not engaged in any obvious purification. So they're going to football games and baseball games, and they're going to hockey games and carrying on watching all kinds of stuff, and it doesn't occur to them to be doing anything other than what they're doing as an ordinary person. Mm-hmm. And yet you have seriously practicing people who don't have the peculiar dimension in any way obvious to them, and they have to cultivate that. So they have to slow down, stop, practice yoga, do breathing exercises, do meditation, and maybe some of that will arise in their case when the time comes. Mm. And then there are those people who just know things, so whatever other people are trying to accomplish relative to their meditation in terms of knowing the future or knowing the present, and having insight and so on, it just happens naturally to some. Whereas for others, they spend years trying to get a particle of that coming through their intelligence. So it's relative. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's a form of, as you say, it could be a sign of progress, it could be a sign of regression. In some cases, it's regression. Because then people go off on that, and they don't want to practice beyond that. So guess what I can do? Guess what I can see? Guess what I know about you? And they get stuck in that program. See? Mm-hmm. 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 There is such a thing, and it works, that they call spontaneous arising. And so if you're practicing meditation, anything is liable to arise. And from a certain place, certain powers, perceptions, extraordinary perceptions can arise. So if you're relaxed enough and free of your ego, which is generally suffocating the spiritual forces from coming up, obstructing them. So when you're more open and you let your true inheritance start to manifest, right, then you may see and you may know and you may hear and you may feel and you may be. So, there's nothing standing in the way of it. You're not trying to be it. So trying to be it stands in the way of what it is. Mm-hmm. You have to get that. Take that to heart. Don't try and be anything, and you might become everything. Mm-hmm. You might know everything. Doesn't make sense, but that's the way it works. There's no sense to it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what we're really talking about is then the dimension, if not the experience of, although this is theoretical, of emptiness, which is not a word, not an experience. But from that, right, anything can arise, and all the best things do arise from that. And therefore it is tied to what is called enlightenment. Happy days, happy times, happiness. Comment? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Is it useful to have a frame of reference for all of these esoteric experiences? And I'm also curious about the...
Well, you're talking about the manifestations.
Yeah.
You're talking about forms, when the real focus is on formlessness. So you're talking about forms of perception that come up out of the subtle, let's say, psychic realms of each person's unconscious. So sometimes, on rare occasions, it might be manifesting the superconscious. And those are good. Superconscious intelligence is good. It can be useful, and it may pass. You may have your moment, your epiphany of it, and then it disappears, which is part of the order of things. You wake and you sleep. Shows up and it disappears. You show up and you disappear. Everything does. So, it's various teachings that I had participated in directly and intensely. Said in terms of all the psychic stuff, is just let it happen, let it burn off. Because what you're really wanting is the emptiness, zero. You want to know what the source is. Now, who knows what that is? So just thinking about the source that is sourceless is intuiting emptiness. It shuts you down. It cancels your conflict. It's paradoxical. The sourceless source. Yikes. Wow, what a statement. Right? But that's common. Because we are originally and always emptiness. In my earlier days, I would call it the pure spirit being. So, without adding too many words to it. Not quite nothingness, it's really the radiance of emptiness, of purity. I would say, no, we have to use the word purity. It's clear, pure. Empty, that's empty. Empty of self and other, empty of emptiness itself. Just is. But it's not even a word, so it can't be a word. So we throw words around because we can't tolerate the absence of self. But there is no self. So you have to reconcile that with your own being. See? The Zen phrase, or the koan, if you want to call it that, nothing happens, refers to the fact of emptiness. Ramana Maharshi would say pure spirit. Spirit being. Same thing as nothing happens. Nothing's ever happened, nothing will ever happen. That's the isness of the subtlest part of our nature, which is like the buddhi, right? The enlightened part, or in Eckankar they call it soul with a capital S. See? Clear awareness. Happiness. The ever happy. Doesn't matter what you call it. I mean, it's nice to have these references. Gives you a little sense of reality there, conceptually. But it's not a concept. It's beyond concept. The real power and magnificence is conceptual-less realization.
In the face of that, a question of any sort seems silly.
Depends on the question.
Yeah. And to sit here and
meditate.
Well,
that's practice. So that's what we're here to do on earth, is get to the position where you can actually feel free enough to practice. See, practice in the spirit of nothing happens. See? And as a result become neurosis free, radically so, completely so. Gone into zero heart space.
Do we have mechanisms throughout our bodies that point to this, or is this an entirely...
Everything in your body points to it. Everything in that mind points to it, right? And perhaps more so when left alone, it points to it because it is it. It's all there is. It's all there is. I've passed through quite a number of different traditions and works and teachers. And I met some. Right? I got my own take from meeting them. Right? And yet you have people who criticize them and are not able to see the light in these people as much as what we can say is the problem. They see the problem. They don't see the solution there. So if we're looking for imperfection, you're going to find it. If you're looking for perfection, you're going to find it. So we have to give the certain teachers the benefit of the doubt, saying, no, they're a certain type of teacher, but not everybody's going to enjoy what certain people are in the resonance of for themselves to get the most out of it. Other people have a different mind, they have a different culture, a different attitude. And that's what they're rubbing up against, I think, in some cases. Their self-programming, right? What they can't see, what they don't want to see, what is impossible for them to see beyond the point. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you see what you see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you're seeing where the teacher's coming from, in all cases. And I think it's a good policy to try and see the teacher from where the teacher's coming from, if you can. Where's the teacher coming from? So you know where you're coming from. You can probably know where everybody else is coming from, but you need to know where the teacher's coming from. And I think that's the key to student-teacher relationship, is how well the student knows where the teacher's coming from. So not in terms of problem, but in terms of solution. Mm-hmm. And that can also extend to the field of music too. Mm-hmm. 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 So if a teacher asks you to sit in silence, how do you do that? Right. What analysis is necessary to figure that out? And then for who? Is it a mental process, or is it a direct sort of, I guess you might say, suggestion? Because you'll find those people, as soon as they hear that, they do it. They sense it. They know it already. They don't go around looking for books to explain to them how a person sits in silence. Some might need it, for sure, with all due respect to their level and resonance. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sit in silence or do deep breathing. How do you do that? If not to do it. Mm-hmm. We're doing it often anyway. We're actually in silence often. Mm-hmm. Even in the midst of sound, we're in silence often. Mm-hmm. So we need to have an intuitive connection with the process of consciousness. And that might be a suggestion in itself. Intuit your consciousness. Be conscious of your intuition, and so on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To what degree is thinking involved in this process?
None. Don't think. Non-thinking is Zen, according to certain people. That is Zen. And Zen may be emptiness. Realization. Realization practice.
Is thinking then something that just is a fly on the wall? It happens, it's dismissed?
Can be useful, but it doesn't have to be useful all the time. And most people make it a preoccupation. And then there's no being. There's so much thinking, there's no being going on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so much thinking, there's just noise going on. There's neuroses. See? There's so much thinking going on, the person doesn't know what's happening. They don't know themselves. There's just so much thinking. There's no rest in it, often. Now you could be a scholar in the Dhamma, and you could be thinking and writing books, but peacefully. Then you are applying the intelligence to a service, which is to manifest books for the sake of the enlightenment of other people, let's say, ideally. But it doesn't require any thinking. The idea is to conquer your thinking so that you can use thinking consciously and creatively when the time comes, instead of being used by thinking to be a very good neurotic. So, the so-called state of clarity is already present. It's not somewhere else. It's openness to what it is. Listening to what it is. Stopping to observe what it is. Looking at it. And letting it go. So that what it is allowed to be what it is. As it is.